So good morning. I'm Captain Sean Gagan. I'm the director of our Major Crimes Division here in Montgomery County.
Good morning, Captain Jeff Bungie. I'm the director of the Special Victims Investigations Division.
Good morning. I'm Captain Mark Ermey. I'm the director of our Criminal Investigations Division.
Good morning, Lieutenant Lisa Engstrom. I am the executive officer for the Investigative Services Bureau.
And good morning, Assistant Chief Nicholas August. I'm Chief of Investigative Services Bureau, and I'll be going through the packet this morning. First of all, for our kind of opening statements is, Montgomery County Police is committed to helping those that are vulnerable as well as those that go missing in our county. And we have established great partnerships within the department as well as outside the department with our federal agencies, state and local, to ensure we have an adequate and quick response to investigating missing persons, whether it be juvenile missing persons or those with intellectual disabilities, dementia, and so on. And we also look at our policies, and what we'll also talk about today is how we've revised our policies to ensure we are doing the best practices to ensure the safety of our community. I'd like to thank Kristen for this great packet she put together. There's not much I'm going to have to say after everything's included in this packet, but we're definitely going to go over this and answer any questions you all have this morning. But we appreciate the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you, Councilmember Katz. So to start with, I think we'll try to walk through the packet, not going into too much detail on everything, but highlighting some of the newer things. So starting with Maryland State Missing Person Systems, there's 3 primary systems for missing persons. In addition, there is a system for individuals involved with the killing or injury of a police officer. So in Maryland, we have the Amber Alert. The Amber Alert, also known as America's Missing Broadcast Emergency Response Alert Plan, is a partnership between broadcasters, Maryland State Police, and local law enforcement agencies to spread the word about a missing child under the age of 18. There are very specific criteria that need to be met for an Amber Alert to go into effect. This includes the law enforcement confirming a child has been abducted, that they believe that the law enforcement believes that the circumstances surrounding the abduction may indicate that the child is in danger of serious bodily harm or death. And when an Amber Alert goes out, it is broadcasted on highway signs if a vehicle is suspected to be involved, through radio and through phone alerts, amongst other means. Similarly, the Silver Alert system is specifically in response to missing individuals who have been diagnosed with cognitive disorders such as Alzheimer's disease or dementia. In Maryland, Silver Alerts can be issued both for vehicle and non-vehicle missing persons. And our officers will go over that a little more in depth, but the non-vehicular option is a fairly new update. The most recent update we have in Maryland is the Purple Alert system. This actually just went into effect on October 1st. And the Purple Alert was established to disseminate information to assist in locating a missing person who has a cognitive impairment, mental disorder, intellectual or developmental disability, or a brain injury, who is deaf, deafblind, hard of hearing, or light deafened, who does not meet the criteria for a Silver Alert. And as mentioned earlier, Maryland also has the Blue Alert system. We did want to call this out as this was issued in Maryland earlier this year due to the death of Correctional Services Agent Davis Martinez. I did want to just highlight as well that the public can subscribe to Blue Alert updates on the Maryland State Police website. To go over some of the more local Montgomery County updates for missing persons. Recently, there has been a collaboration between MCPD and the Office of Emergency Management and Homeland Security to use Alert Montgomery as another avenue for missing person alert systems. There's also been several updates to missing person procedures, also known as Function 617. And these include adding clarifying questions to the missing persons abilities to the search urgency evaluation form. The scoring of that form has also been updated so that now any score under 15 will trigger an urgent response. There's been updated documentation of caregiver and parent information, and information on the Autism IDD Alzheimer's Dementia Unit has been reflected to be updated with changes of the unit's name and responsibilities. I also wanted to highlight just some other things that are going on in other jurisdictions as well as federally. Disparities in how demographics of missing persons have been classified and reported have been drivers of recent changes to missing person alert systems across our country in various years. American Indian and Alaska Native persons in the NCIC database, they amount to approximately 2% of the database, while the overall population in the U.S. is estimated to be around 1.1%. You also see this overrepresentation with African American Black Americans, who are reported to be approximately 35% of the total numbers of entries in the NCIC, while being 12% of the U.S. population. So some of the federal change drivers that have been initiated in recent years to address this disparity include the Ashanti Alert System. This was a federal law that establishes a voluntary nationwide communication network to aid in the search and recovery of missing persons over the age of 17 who fall outside of Amber and Silver alert systems. And very recently, as of this past summer, we have the MEP Missing and Endangered Persons Alert Code. This actually was just introduced in August. And this new nationwide alert code is for missing and endangered people whose circumstances are outside of the criteria for Amber alerts. The FBI has identified 1,888,000 missing persons in 2023 who fell outside of this criteria. It should be noted that the Maryland State Police Coordinator at this time has not drafted the criteria for using this code in Maryland, but is aware of it. And that is something that we might be able to see sent out over EAS alerts for missing persons in the future. In other states, we have missing Indigenous person alerts or feather alerts. We have those for missing American Indian and Alaska Native persons. The first one going into effect in Washington State, and they're also seen in Colorado and California. And in California, effective January 1st of this past year, the Ebony Alert System was implemented. It was designed to issue and coordinate alerts in respect to Black youth, including young Black women and girls who are reported missing under unexplained or suspicious circumstances, at risk, developmentally disabled, or who have been abducted. And this was created with the intention of minimizing the racial disparities in California missing person cases and the associated media coverage. This is, of course, a statewide alert system, but should something like the Ebony Alert System be implemented in the state of Maryland, it would expand our officers' ability to put out an alert for a missing person a bit by having the ability to get state alert notifications for adults between the ages of 18 and 25 who do not have vehicle information associated with the missing person out a little bit more. And with that, unless there are any questions, I will turn it over to our officers to explain some of the more recent changes in depth. Thank you.
You, please.
Hey, good morning. I'm going to briefly talk about the two most recent alert systems that we have available to us in Montgomery County, and then take any questions after that. But again, this was a very detailed packet, so I'm hopeful to answer any questions that you have. In our next slide. So the first one's going to be a purple alert, which did become effect October 1st of this year. This is covering any person whose whereabouts are unknown, who has a cognitive impairment, mental disability, intellectual or developmental disability, or brain injury that is not an Alzheimer's disease, dementia, or a physical and mental emotional related to substance abuse. There is other criteria on here, but with the purple alert, all of our alerts are coordinated through Maryland State Police, and they are still working on the criteria to implement this. We have been in communication with them. They said if you do have a situation that falls under the Maryland law, to contact us, and we will put the purple alert out, but they have not established their criteria. One thing I think with the Amber Alert, what we're most often familiar with is the roadway signs that say Amber Alert and flashing and giving a vehicle description information. When a vehicle is not involved, that's where it becomes a little more confusing on what information is going to be put out. Roadway signs are only going to be authorized most likely if a vehicle is involved, because we just can't put someone's name up there and expect the community to know who Mark Jones looks like or anything like that. So that's going to be specific to vehicles. But the most important thing about any of these alerts is the priority in disseminating information. In Montgomery County, with our police department, we have over 74,000 followers on our social media, and we immediately get that information out. Our detectives contact our public information office 24 hours a day, and we put that information out to get the information there. So all these alerts add another system to get information out using our statewide partners. So when the Purple Alert, when we do have an incident in Montgomery County, we will use this system to coordinate with Maryland State Police so they can disseminate information even further beyond our audience that we have here locally, because time is also important in these missing person cases to get information out. Next slide.
If I can interrupt for
Sure.
1 second, you have a listing of saying what it doesn't do for if you have Alzheimer's, et cetera. I think if someone has Alzheimer's, what alert would what alert would you send out?
That would be the Silver Alert.
Okay, so I think for information, we need to put in parentheses, though it's saying what it won't do, it should have something in there that says what you do for it.
Yes. And what is actually done when the alerts go out, that's controlled by the state police and
Yeah.
where they're sending it out. And particularly, we really have an alert that covers every type of missing person in Montgomery County that we're getting information out. Depending on the situation, what information we have, that's going to depend on what information is put forth, which is also why we collaborated with emergency management in establishing the local alerts in Montgomery County, where we use Alert Montgomery to send information out. And we tested that alert recently back, July, with our missing juvenile in Gaithersburg, and actually tried out the system, got information out there, and then debriefed about it and see how we can improve the system. So really getting information out, and I think that's important, but Purple Alert is the criteria under state law is listed here, and then when we go over to the Silver Alert, we also have the non-vehicle option. We're familiar with the Silver Alert vehicle option, where you also do see that on the roadway signs that has that information, and a lot of our alerts, whether it's silver or amber, the people are located through law enforcement. They actually come about the people using technology, whether it's license plate readers, and we get information that this vehicle has passed down I-200, or it's passed by an officer. That's how we get the information out there.
Yeah.
But it's also good to have the community on the lookout for the vehicle, but a majority of ours have been found by law enforcement in surrounding jurisdictions. The non-vehicle alert, it basically is a Silver Alert, but they're not in a vehicle. And this information will be broadcasted through the state police, through their outlets that they have, our MCAT, our Intel Center, as well as lottery terminals. So the information will be broadcasted through their system that they have there that goes out to their retailers, and passing out to nonprofit organizations that concentrate on helping find missing persons and their social media. Next page here is about Maryland State Police alert process. Again, they're all coordinated. Our detectives and our supervisors know to immediately contact a duty commander with the state police and provide that information out there. They do have criteria. One of the important things is when we have all these alerts, we don't want them to be desensitized. If we're sending out an alert every day about, hey, and people's phones are going off while they're at meetings saying missing person, this and that, we want to make sure that we are using it correctly and going to be the most efficient to get the community's attention for the most drastic situations where life is at risk. So that is why the state police also has this criteria there to make sure an alert isn't going to be going out so often people are not going to be paying attention to them. So that's a priority that we have here, and with the we will continue to coordinate with the amber, purple, and silver alerts. This lists the different types of ways they are sending out the information, whether it's through the lottery terminals, the wireless alert statewide system to search and rescue, aviation, MSP media. So again, increasing our network after we already sending out to 74,000 followers through social media to increase it throughout the state and throughout the region. One update we recently did was with our function code on missing persons. We took a look at this because one of the things I noticed is I did some review of critical missing calls that we had for adults, and I noticed some confusion when patrol officers were filling out our search urgency evaluation form. One instance, I saw an officer at the scene fill it out and make their notification, and their score was different than when they submitted in a report. And it wasn't due to any reason, it was mostly confusion. Our form was not specific enough to talk about when we say, okay, are they fit? Well, that's a very question that puts out there. Well, if I think someone's fit or someone else thinks someone's fit, they get confused, and that could be a difference between a score of 1 to a score of 3. So really putting parameters out there, make it more clearing on what fit means. Are they able to dress themselves? Are they able to feed themselves? Do they know their name? And not just looking at the physical appearance of someone or if they're able to walk a certain distance, but looking further down into that. So that's one changes we made there. But with our new form, if they score a 1, and I think the old form is in your packet on page 8. And the new form will be on the PowerPoint presentation. But anyone that scores a 1 is automatic notification to our search management team. And our search management team will get notified. They will get the information from patrol officer and determine their search efforts on how far we're going to extend our search efforts. And we're getting the experts, the subject matter experts involved to help locate the missing person. Again, other questions we added to the new form about information on them. But we also have the Form 592, which is now a social media attestment statement. We had this for NCIC, having the caretaker or a representative sign allowing the person to be put into NCIC. Now we're doing this with social media. Obviously, anytime we put a photo on our department website or on our Facebook page, it is out there. And even if we take that post down a week later, the community needs to understand that photo has been disseminated across many different outlets, and most likely the photo will still be out there even if we remove it from our website. So we want to make sure the community understands that when we do post a picture, we want the picture to be put out there, but even once the person is returned, that most likely out there somewhere in the social media world or on the website somewhere else, we only can control what we put out and what we take down from our website. So given that information on privacy concerns, as well as understanding what we are going to do when we have that information, we're posting it out to our network. The next slide. This is the new form, and if you compare it to page 8 in your packet, you can see how the differences were made to be able to make it more clear for officers that are responding out there to really understand that what search efforts we're going to need to do. And so also at the bottom here, we have the role of the person that's reporting to get the caretaker's information. For people that are not living with their family and are in a home setting outside of where they typically live, in a group home or some other, we want to also have the parents' information so we can make sure not just holding the caretaker responsible and notifying the parents, but also contacting them and having that information so they are aware of the missing situation, and we can get in contact with them if they have any history or information that could assist us in locating their loved one. So, and we also note what time and who contacted them to make sure that they are aware of it and they're not finding out through other means, or we're trying to hold someone else responsible for making that notification. So that's a priority of ours to make sure everyone is aware if someone is missing that does not typically live with their loved ones. Next slide. So this is, again, our update to our recent function code. We talked about the update to the form, but I think one important thing that Chief Yamada has done reference missing person. We are now responding emergency or lights and siren, whatever you want to call that, to critically missing individuals, where time is of the essence to find them. where time has not passed, or we need to get there pretty quick to immediately start search efforts. So while that will save some time out there and also prioritizing the call for service, it's also important for the community to know to contact us immediately when they suspect someone is missing. We can get there in a timely manner within 1 or 2 minutes, but if there is a little delay of 30 or 45 minutes of notifying the police, that is not helping us, because especially those with intellectual disabilities, time is of the essence, and we need to ensure that we get enough resources out there to start our efforts and bring in our fire rescue partners that have other resources available to us, or if we're using nonprofit search groups like dogs to come in, we want to make sure we get those out there as quick as possible and use those resources. So increasing it to a priority response for those types of calls is something new that we're doing, and hopefully will prioritize resources and help us give us a couple extra minutes to get out there and start the search efforts. Parent and guardian notification documentation. Again, we have a unique setting where some of these missing individuals are not living with their loved ones. So we need to ensure that we notify them immediately to get them involved, get the family involved, if they can provide us any other information, or their typical, if they know more about the missing person, whether they use transit, or whether they have went missing before and went to certain areas, so we can really concentrate on that, as well as notify outside jurisdictions. We live in an area that has a lot of mass transit, and if you're in Silver Spring, you can get to Washington, D.C. within minutes. And we need to be able to notify our other jurisdiction, as well as documenting who we spoke to in that jurisdiction to seek their help and effort, but really work with our partners and having that great lines of communication to hopefully locate the person quicker. Also, our emergency alert with Alert Montgomery, which we'll talk about a little more on how that system is being implemented. On the next slide. Do we have anyone from emergency management here? And anyone from emergency management? Come on, Luke is here. If he can come on up, I see him sitting back there. But this again is a great partnership.
We know him. We
know, yeah.
recognize him.
So this is a great partnership with them. Lieutenant Ingerstrom and Luke have been working together over the last couple months to create this system. And I'm just going to let Luke go ahead and talk about this and how it's going to work.
Sure. Good morning.
Good morning.
So this is something that we've been working on for quite some time, and was catalyzed with the Hassan search back in July, as we talked about. What we realize is that there is, through all these different means of alerting for missing persons, we still had a hole where we didn't have the capacity to alert for a critical missing child. We have upwards of 240,000 subscribers to Alert Montgomery throughout the county. So it's a great tool to be used for something like this. So working with Montgomery County Police, we work very closely together to develop the criteria for which this person would qualify for such an alert. In that case, there are specific criteria that you could find in your packet. Once the child has met those criteria, the executive on duty would contact our duty officer. Our duty officer would then contact our alert sender. The alert centers are a specialized group who are trained in exactly how to pinpoint specific areas in the county and how to leverage that tool, because it is pretty sophisticated. And then they would send out a templated text message that would also go to email and voice, depending on what people have signed up for through Alert Montgomery. From there, we are limited on the characters, as you guys know, that come through. So not so much, obviously, on the voice side or the email side, but most of these people prefer to get them through text messages. So in that case, they're linked through to another a website that will provide them full information, so the full narrative that law enforcement has provided us in terms of the description, where they were last seen, any of the factors they should consider about approaching them, any of the details that law enforcement want passed on, then we make that known to the public through this alert system.
Okay, thank you.
And last slide here is just giving an update on our numbers of missing person cases that Montgomery County Police is handling. So when we receive these cases, initially it will be assigned to our criminal investigative division, our district level detectives. They keep the case for 72 hours. If the person is not located in that time frame, is then transferred over to our major crimes cold case unit, which gives a very it's a all hands on deck approach once it gets to that 72-hour notice, and all those detectives in cold case are involved in it. And that is for our adult side of it. Our juveniles, they are handled in our special victims, whether they are runaway or missing, and they stay within there. And Captain Bungan talk about their success number right here, how many outstanding juveniles we still have in Montgomery County on missing a runaway, and it is a very small number. So I'm going to give it to Captain Bungie before I talk about these numbers. If he can just go over the runaway and missing person.
Thanks, Chief. I'm happy to report that in 2023, year-to-date, we had 828 reports of missing children. This year, year-to-date, we are down, we only have 629. That's still a very high number. Out of those 629, we have 8 that remain open, and of those 8, 4 of those are over 30 days. They've been missing greater than 30 days. And the last time I got to talk to the committee, 3 of those 4 are unaccompanied minors, and as I explained last time, those are very, very difficult investigations. They're here for a very short amount of time, don't have a digital footprint, typically don't have cell phones. The family members or people that they are staying with initially don't have a lot of information and oftentimes don't have pictures. So that's 3 out of the 4 that are over 30, and then the 4th that's over 30 was seen as recently as last week by mom, but just refuses to come home, and there's a substance abuse issue going on with that child as well. So for this year, 98.7% closure rate, and we're very pleased with that.
All right, so let's get back to the one whose mother saw him last week. So you still consider that open?
Yes, sir. The child is not home. The child doesn't want to be home, so our investigators still attempt to find this juvenile. Obviously, there are numerous other cases that come in. This one's a concern for us because we do know that there's a substance abuse issue, but they continue to look for this child just like they do any other that comes in for us.
Okay, thanks.
And I think the important part with Captain Bunge's team is a lot of these juveniles are runaways, and connecting them with resources once they return and providing that to the family is an important aspect of it. And we continue to provide resources to them. Their detectives establish relationships with these missing or runaways, which often helps. I mean, I've seen the detectives going to Baltimore City because they have information that they're located down there, and immediately getting down there and bringing them back. But with repeat runaways, there's something else going on, and we need to be able to provide them the resources or where they can go to get the resources, so we can hopefully reduce that and keep them safe. And it's a sad situation when it's leading down to substance abuse, and they're outside the home. And really, how we can provide resources, the county and state level can provide resources to get treatment to hopefully resolve the root cause of these issues. As far as our adult cases here, we have a high closure rate in all of these. So in looking at 2023, we had 97% closure rate in our criminal investigative division. And I often say, we get reports for a missing adult. It isn't against the law for someone to go, quote, missing. Mr. Katz is tired of being at home and wants to go away for a week to get away.
My wife would prefer that.
Right. She might report you missing to get some stuff
No,
done
she
around the
wouldn't.
house.
She
But
wouldn't.
it's perfectly legal to go away. And we do run into those instances where, they're an adult in a good physical and mental state, and they are just away and don't want the other person that's calling to report them to even know that they are in a certain location. So we also look at that, and it's a lot different than our juvenile cases or people that do have disabilities. So that's probably why we're not at that 100% closure rate, because there is people that change their digital footprint, change their phone, change their credit cards, and so on, that they have left the area and trying to relocate to for whatever reasons. Our cold case numbers. In 2023, the number of cases they had is 35, and to date they've closed 29. And Captain Gagan, do you have any information, just generalization on those open cases, on what type of cases they are?
So thank you, Chief. So some of the cases that we work in the cold case missing person, unfortunately, there is information that there could be the potential that these are victims of a homicide. Just so happens we're working this year, 2024. We're working several cases that the person that went missing has completely kind of gone off the radar. And last time they were seen, we have information that they were potentially, victims of a serious crime. So we keep working those cases. One of the reasons why these cases come from our criminal investigations up to major crimes is that we typically will assign the missing persons team along with a homicide detective just in case we ultimately find the victim or there's information that leads us to build probable cause against a person that was associated with that missing person.
And last portion here is our managed search operations team. And so far in 2024, the number of missing persons that they've been notified on is 1,881, and number of those at risk is 515. And those at risk require a significant response. And luckily, most of them are found within a short amount of time due to our search operations and the resources we now have to bring out to conduct those search operations. So I am, of course, available to answer any questions you have on this topic.
Well, first off, let us begin by thanking you all for everything you do. Many times people believe all this happens by magic, and it's you all are the magicians. Someone goes missing, you all are the ones who have to go find them. I mean, someone says, why didn't someone do something? You're the someone that's doing something. So we sincerely appreciate that. If the public, the fact that there's so many different color codes for these various missing situations, the public really, I think, doesn't have to involve. If a loved one is missing, they call 911, and all of us, I see heads shaking here, they call 911. You all figure out how you're going to dispense that information. They don't need to worry with that, and I think that's something that people have to keep in mind during that time of excitement that we're there and that we'll figure it out. Is there a waiting time for someone to be missing? I mean, you always see on Law and Order that it's, that they haven't been missing long enough. So how does that work?
Well, that's TV. So no, there is not a minimum requirement. We respond out immediately if someone is reported missing or they think someone is missing, whether it's even just a couple of minutes. We'll make that decision once we arrive at the scene on what resources we're going to put forward to look for that person. But we encourage the community to immediately report a missing person as soon as they have any suspect that they are missing for whatever reason, especially those with developmental disabilities. So it's important to, what you see on TV is not accurate here in Montgomery County. Our officers immediately respond down. That's why we also prioritized our critical missing response to be a priority response now rather than a non-emergency response, just so we can get out there and get that information, and then our officers and detectives can immediately start looking for the person.
And you touched on it earlier, and I'm certainly glad that we have the great communication in the DMV. But how much of if the state sends out information, how many times do they send it to the district to Virginia? Do they get it automatically as well?
Yes, it gets sent out through their network. Now, I can't say how often they repeat and send it out. Their alerts immediately get sent out to all the regional and jurisdictional. So it's immediately put out there. But if we have information, especially if we talked about the blue alert, that suspect was located through investigative means. And once we, through investigative means, determine that the person can be located in a certain area, we then reach out to that law enforcement agency and bring information forward to them to provide them more intel about saying, we think this person is in your jurisdiction or around. Here's the information again. Because with alerts going out throughout the region, if we get one here in Montgomery County that's coming from Oklahoma, priority-wise, do we have any relationship that that person may be here? But if we get a call from that local jurisdiction saying, hey, they have family that lives in Rockville, so on, we then prioritize that information to put more resources out there, as well as put it out on our radio channels so we know and officers will be on the lookout for that once we receive additional information.
Very good. Questions, please? Yes, go. Go ahead.
Thank you all for the work that you do. I noticed, so like California and some others, they are trying out these other alerts, the Ebony Alert, the Indigenous Persons Alert, to try to minimize the racial disparities that they're seeing in their data. And I wondered how ours looks in terms of our closure rates when we look at break that down by demographics. Is there potentially, should we be looking at something like that?
Sure. So I can say that every missing person case that Montgomery County Police gets, we provide the same information and information out to the community, immediately putting that out. In 2023, we had 739 Black or brown individuals that went missing, and that also includes Latino population under that. For white, we had 614. So there is a higher number of Black and brown missing people in Montgomery County. That also includes our juveniles too, and not just adults. So, but as my captains here spoke, we have a very high success rate in closing those cases with missing person only, runaways only having 4 out of over 800 cases. We prioritize that, get that information out. So I know from the Montgomery County Police stance, we understand the priority and disparities out there in getting the information out, and we provide it to all of our media partners, but we can't speak about how they prioritize putting information out to the community. So I think that's an important aspect there. And as I stated earlier, the more alerts that we create, the more confusing it is I feel it's going to be for the community. But prioritizing information to get out there, the federal government now has an alert system that covers anything that is not any of the other alerts. But it's just different ways of disseminating that information. So I think having a priority, whatever the alert is called, but understanding that we are committed to providing that information out, disseminating it, and putting all of our resources for any missing person in Montgomery County is the priority.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. And, I can't speak to the success in the other jurisdictions of creating that alert. They saw a result with the media and from whatever other, for other reasons. And this was their effort to address that. I don't know how successful it has been. But it might be helpful for us to, now 4 is not a big number, but looking at these variety of data sets that we have overall, it might be interesting for us to get that all broken down by demographics at the state level, as well as at the county level, where we have a bigger set. And even if, adding on multiple different alerts might not be the answer that makes the most sense, but if this is something that we should have our eye on, it would be helpful to know, because that's clearly, obviously there's huge disparities in terms of who goes missing, and that's something that we need to be talking to HHS about, and really across the county about addressing those disparities. But it would be great to get the closure rates in all these different categories broken down by demographics, also at the state level, given the size of the data set.
And one thing I will mention, which I definitely don't want to forget, is we have a great relationship with our media outlets here in the Montgomery County area, especially being such a large geographic area right near DC. Our public information officer knows producers on first name basis. We also have a lot of small media outlets within Montgomery County, and having that great relationship with them, if we contact them and say, hey, this is a priority because this person is missing, they immediately put information out quicker, and they're often sharing our social media, which intensifies the number of people we're reaching. But having that great network as well as collaboration with our media outlets and having that transparency and trust between them is really beneficial. I know a lot of other jurisdictions outside of Maryland don't have that great relationship with their media outlets, and really having that in the DC metropolitan area is a benefit, not only to getting our cases solved, but really helping the community.
That's great, and that's a great point. And so there certainly are vehicles for if we need to be intentionally doing something more for certain subsets of people, that we have vehicles to do that. And so we just need to know if there is something that we need to be doing extra in certain categories. Maybe it's a racial demographic, maybe it's another category, but it'd be good to be taking a good look at those variables that some other jurisdictions are seeing patterns in. Thank you.
Thank you, please.
Thank you. And thank you for flagging that the purple alert only went into effect 6 days ago, and that MSP hasn't done the guidance document for it yet. I do know that bill came about due to ongoing concerns with the Silver Alert was enacted in Maryland in 2009, right? And the statute itself doesn't have an age cutoff to it. It's for adults, but it doesn't have a 65 and over cutoff. But when the state police, who were tasked with creating the guidance for that, did it, they wrote a 65 and up guideline. And so that's what all local law enforcement agencies were told to do, right? There had been some back and forth over time trying to figure out why that came to be and why it was focused on 65 and up. And that's truly where we've had some ongoing challenges, particularly with adults who have developmental disabilities or other impairments that make it challenging for them to be on their own. Taking aside those who elope and just don't want to be found but are not otherwise impaired, because that is they are allowed to do that, as you said. So I know that MSP revised their Silver Alert guidelines in February while the Purple Alert bill was pending. I know I probably need a whiteboard behind me to explain the different alerts and things I'm talking about. But my hope is, given the many different types of alerts, and again, public education and information to understand what does a color mean, what does that mean about the person we're seeking, that perhaps this is my wish list for MSP. Perhaps there's a more intentional look at how to reconcile the different pieces and how to do that in a way, and perhaps also to dispel some of the CSI type things that people think, or the myth busting of, well, there's a wait time, there is no wait time, so that the public has a better understanding of what happens. Because I don't think that's clear. I just don't think that's clear. And I know you all can do it here locally, but it's something we need to have statewide, that's standardized. And I also wanted to touch upon what is in the alerts, because it's when people have been raised concerns about a disparity or something going on, then and I receive them. I still do. From my old work. I don't get the MCAC alerts anymore, but I still get the NCR Watch Desk stuff, right? And so, there's a photo, there's detailed information. They talk about the person's age, they talk about why, right? So if it's a cognitive impairment, that is listed. It gives a complete physical description, age, height, weight, etc., clothes last known wearing, even though they also have a photo of the person included. It includes the vehicle, if there is a vehicle involved. It includes the license plate, if the license plate is involved, and the time last seen and the place last seen, and who the law enforcement agency is that's the primary in that missing persons investigation. And then they do send out this alert has been canceled and the person has been found when they're found, so that the departments know that that case has been resolved. And that's something that all these different agencies within both the state of Maryland through the MCAC's distribution list, which is statewide, and then the NCR, which is multi-jurisdictional, so it's Northern Virginia, Southern Maryland, us, Prince George's, DC, all get the same information. But not all of that gets broadcast publicly. So can you speak to that sort of really trying to understand the decision point of where it's broadcast publicly versus what goes out on the watch distribution lists?
Sure. So we have a standardized template for all of our missing person cases, and we went to this standardized template. So when investigators are filling this out, we're getting the necessary information to put out to the community as quickly as possible. Mm-hmm. It is then followed up with a media release later on that will put additional information. We try to put as much information that we have, and that is the important part here. When we're often in the initial response, depending on the situation, if we're dealing with a caretaker that may have only minimum information about the situation until we can get a hold of a parent or guardian of the loved one that is missing, that we can get more information out there. So we try to put as much information that we originally have in the initial response, which may be less than the information that we get further on in our investigation. But updating that information and getting that out in a timely manner. Now, if we have an extended search, which we saw back in July, we were given multiple in-person media conferences to talk about what our steps have been, any information we have gathered, any change in what they were possibly wearing, where we think they may have went to. So really providing that information, being transparent about it is our priority. But it's when we get that information, we also want to validate that information that we receive to make sure the information we're putting out to the public is 100% accurate, and we're not, if we tell them they're wearing something and they're actually wearing this and someone saw it, that can hamper our efforts in locating someone.
Right. Okay. And thank you for your updates to the form. I think that's really important in breaking down the distinctions that help people to really understand how much of a risk someone is to themselves. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you. Thank you all. Is there anything else, Ms. Cummins?
Nothing to add. Thank you.
Thank you all again for everything you do. You truly save lives on a daily basis, and we're most aware of that. And the next topic that we're going to have is an update from the 911 Emergency Communications Center. Ms. Farag is going to be joining us for that. Playing musical chairs, are we, Chief? Good morning. Okay. Anybody have openings? If not, we're going to turn to, if I could invite the panel to please introduce themselves. We know Ms. Frog, she's going to speak here in a moment, but please, if you could.
Assistant Chief Dan Ogren. I'm the Montgomery County Fire Rescue Lead at PSCC.
Good morning, Fire Chief Corey Smedley.
Good morning.
Charles Bailey.
Good morning, Chief of Management Services Bureau, Darren Frank.
Good morning, Cassandra Onley, 911 Director.
Again, we want to thank you all as we begin for doing everything you do. We many times forget to do that, and we never should. I don't know, does anybody have an opening statement from the panel? Chief. If I say chief here, everybody answers.
I don't know.
Yeah, this is like calling mom in a grocery store. Good gosh.
We appreciate the opportunity to give an update. It remains a very challenging time for our communications center, but I will say that the people we have there, both our communications center personnel and our fire personnel, are doing an outstanding job at keeping us where we need to be to serve the community. There's a lot of different efforts that we're looking at to improve our service because, again, we're going to talk a little bit about our response times, how fast we answer calls. We'd love to get to zero, and we'll continue to do our best to get to zero as far as wait times and picking up that phone. There are some immense challenges in the way, but that is certainly a goal of ours. And we appreciate the council's support as well as the county executives. There have been, I've testified before that there are some efforts that we have asked to be taken on by the council, by the county executive, to include a retirement package for these hard workers, and that's made a difference. So I think all of us are working together and really making some improvements. So we thank you.
And we thank you. And please don't be, I know you're not going to be bashful, I don't need to say it, but please don't be bashful. If there's things that we can do in addition to what we've done, and some things always, can work, and some things you try your best and it just didn't work, we need to hear it as quickly as we can so that we can be truly a partner in solving all this. With that, Ms. Farag, please.
Sure. Good morning, everybody. And I wanted to apologize in advance. This is going to be a very acronym-heavy discussion today, and I'm going to try to identify everything for you. And in some cases, there are two acronyms that mean the same thing. So,
Isn't that nice?
Of
Yeah.
course. So the Emergency Communications Center, the ECC, is the call center function for emergency operations in the county. That includes police, fire, EMS, and it's also brought on a new function of transferring or conferencing with the crisis center for certain types of behavioral health calls. Within the ECC, there are actually two physical sites. The primary one, where most of the work is done most of the time, is the Public Safety Communication Center, or PSCC. They also have a backup center, which is called the Alternate Emergency Communication Center, and that is the AECC. For years, they have done a lot of planning to ensure redundancy and backup and system integrity because it's such a critical service to provide to the community. It is a unique governmental service. Residents, visitors, business people come here, and if they need help, they call 911 and they expect immediate help to respond to them, right? So as much proactive planning and risk reduction that the fire department and the police department are doing with proactive policing, still a huge portion of their job is responsive, is reactive, and it's community driven. This is what the community wants. This is what they've come to expect. And it's a very complicated system. And some of the things I wanted to get into today for you are staffing, and you're very well aware of the staffing challenges that the ECC has had for quite a while. The workload keeps going up. And the departments can talk a little bit about some of the initiatives they're looking at now to help reduce the calls coming into the ECC. There are complicated IT needs, including the computer-aided dispatch, the public safety radio system with the radios, mobile data, computers, all of that. And there's also facility planning. I just mentioned that they have two sites, and the Alternate Emergency Communication Center is in the CIP for facility planning purposes. But as we can talk about a little bit today, the primary site might actually need to be bigger than it is to appropriately house both current operations as well as training, plus any types of ways they want to offload some of these calls. And they're ready to talk about increasing telephone reporting unit, for example. It's not my quote. It might have come from the recent Metropolitan DC staffing study, but why do we have police officers acting as insurance agents when people have a non-personal injury car accident and they need a police number, report number to give to their insurance company? So those are some of the things I'm going in. I'm going to give a little bit of background as well to the ECC. It has changed rapidly over the past 15 years for a variety of reasons. As you know, 9/11 happened in 2001. There were some defects in the interoperability discovered among the region between the different counties in Washington, D.C., and that there was a federal mandate to make sure that the systems are all interoperable in case something like this happens again. In 2009, Montgomery County undertook a very large planning push to modernize the ECC and all public safety radio communications, keep up to date with regional needs that I just mentioned, but also rapidly changing IT. I mean, most people were calling in on landlines. These are copper lines. The ECC was supported on copper lines by Verizon. We saw the shift over to the voice over internet protocol occur, and now almost everybody, I think, is calling on mobile phones. And the fact that everybody's got them by their sides, if something big happens or something scary happens and the public sees it, they might get 30, 50, 100 calls for the same event, and that can overload the system. Yep. So in 2010 was one of the first tragedies, the public tragedies that the public was aware of, and unfortunately a man was struck by lightning here in Rockville. At King Farm Park, and the people who called to try to get him help encountered a bunch of busy signals, right? And that is very terrifying to a person, trying to get that emergency help that I mentioned. Unfortunately, he ended up passing away. In 2012, there was a woman who called in because her husband was having trouble breathing, and this was on the fire side. They had fire call takers and dispatchers, and they tried to transfer to the dispatcher, and they heard nothing but snoring. And that dispatcher did not respond to the call for another 5 or 6 minutes. The call taker had taken it back to try to help with medical directions on the phone. It turns out that dispatcher was 17 hours into a 24-hour overtime shift, right? And so overtime is going to come up again in this conversation.
Point out again what year that was, please.
2012.
2012, okay.
In 2016, there was IT upgrade work going on at the primary site, the PSCC, so all the staff was at the alternate site, the AECC, which is a much older footprint. An HVAC there, which does climate control for all of the very sensitive systems, failed. This caused a transfer step over to Pepco, but instead of working like it should, it froze the whole system up and it was down for a couple of hours. And it turns out that HVAC was near its end of service life. It was 20 years old. And even though the county is maintaining and checking on things and stuff, but when things get that old, they're going to be failures. In 2019, finally, the Mother's Day outage of the public safety radio system, that was a legacy system too, again, past its end of service life. Some of the discussion that came up then is the vendor was no longer supporting the radio system. The county was actually trying to stockpile replacement parts that they purchased off of eBay, right? And so I wanted to highlight these things because planning, long-range planning, becomes very critical for all of these different facets of the ECC operations. In 2014, thanks to a Gartner consultant report, they determined that they were going to consolidate ECC operations. They were going to consolidate it under the police department. They were going to civilianize all the workers. They were going to eliminate the two different types of call takers and create a universal call taker position, and hopefully move the career firefighters back into the field. And that plays on the fact that there was a study several years ago that showed an 180 firefighter deficit in order to meet operations as needed without the use of overtime. So in terms of staffing now, you've been briefed for the past few years on the staffing shortage in the ECC. Last year when we talked about budget, there was a 41% vacancy rate for the telecommunicator positions. The budget, the FY25 budget, did end up eliminating 27 total positions. It eliminated 25 telecommunicator positions and 2 support positions. So that has actually reduced the vacancy rate, but it doesn't mean that there's additional staff. However, their total vacancy rate right now is about 16%, and their telecommunicator rate vacancy is about 22%. They do have 23 people being trained, so they have been able to close that gap a little bit to bring on more trainees at this time. The department has also done a lot, Director Onley has done a lot to try to make a work-life balance work after COVID. That hit, people had different ideas about what their work-life balance should be. Instead of just 12-hour shifts, they're now running 4 primary shifts, which run 3 a.m. to 3 p.m., 3 p.m. to 3 a.m., 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., but they also have 2 part-time positions, one from 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. and one from 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. The last study I can find of staffing and operations was from 2017, and I've got a comparison chart on page 3 for you to take a look at. And this was kind of like a staffing model per shift for the ECC. In 27, they had about 28 to 29 people, but notice the difference in the call taker numbers. They had 15 to 16 available, and now we have 10 to 14 available. That's not necessarily because calls have gone down, calls have actually gone up, right? And that's more a reflection, just reality-based of what kind of staff they've got available right now. So this is leading to overtime. Again, like all public safety departments, police overtime's increased over the past few years. For the ECC, overtime has exceeded budgeted amounts for at least the past 2 years. And the ECC is advised that mandatory overtime is required almost every day. The chart on page 4 is showing they went over their overtime budget by about 19% in fiscal 23, and they went over last year in fiscal 24 by 36%. The budgeted overtime hasn't increased significantly at all for FY25, but more than just being appropriately budgeted, it's important to understand what kind of impact all of that mandatory overtime is having on existing staff. There's improvement in turnover. The MCPD is advised that average staff turnover rate in 2023 was 7%, and so far in 2024 it's been 6%. For their new hire training classes, turnover in 2023 was 18%, and so far this year it's been about 17%. Those might sound a little bit high, but compared to that 2017 report, average staff turnover for 2014 to 2016 was 13%, and average turnover for the new hire training classes was 37%. So they've definitely made some inroads in that place. Recruiting and training, I've got a little update on the numbers of classes and the trainees over the past calendar year. I've got a list of the initiatives that the department and the executive have undergone in in partnership with the union too, as far as like the pension benefit and that, and of course the council has funded where available these new initiatives, and I can let the departments talk about those new initiatives a little bit more. In terms of a workload update, I had mentioned before that last year's calls were 855,000 for fiscal 24, which is more than in fiscal 18 and fiscal 19 pre-COVID levels. The call load still stays above COVID. I've got a graphic that Director Onley gave me on page 5. A lot of this has to do with the fact that people aren't totally sure what number they should be calling, whether it's an emergency or not. And so 988 is there for crisis support and suicide intervention. You have the crisis center itself. You have 311 for things like I need a new recycling bin, I need the leaves removed, that type of thing. And then, of course, 911 for emergencies. And that is one question I had, whether or not there is room for public service campaigning that could help educate the community on which numbers to call and what that might look like. In terms of answering times, the ECC does adhere to National Emergency Number Association standard, which is 90% of all calls within 15 seconds and 95% of all calls within 20 seconds. Over the past 3 calendar years, there's a chart on page 6. In 2021, they were averaging, the answer time was 4 seconds. For 2022, it was 9 seconds. In 2023, it was 10 seconds. So it's definitely well within the standard. It is starting to inch up a little bit. The percentage of calls going to an automated queue, however, has been increasing from 15% in fiscal 22 to 25% in fiscal 25. The average time on hold, while still low, is also increasing, and there's a chart on page 6 for your reference. The average time on hold was 7 seconds in fiscal 22, and fiscal 25 to date, it's about 11 seconds, which isn't long, right? The council does regularly get complaints about being put into the queue. People hear a facsimile like noise, and they don't know what's happening. They don't understand, even though they're told on the automated message, please stay on the line. Unfortunately, just for any members of the public who are watching, if they need to call 911, they need to stay on the line. If they hang up and try to call back, they lose their place, and it's actually going to take longer to answer that call. In terms of funding updates, there's been a couple of changes at the General Assembly in 2019 that's allowing the county portion to increase their fee. And it also went from per household bill, I guess, to per line. So I'm paying for 5 mobile phone lines myself right now, so each and every one of those gets this fee per line per month. In 2021, I believe, they allowed the county portion to increase their fee to whatever is necessary to cover costs. And when they had done a survey of local jurisdictions, they found that most these fees that are generated through the 911 fee are only covering about 36% or so of the actual cost of running an emergency communications center. So approximately 12 counties have increased their fees since this happened, and Frederick County had just increased their fee to $2.25 per line per month. So this is a potential opportunity to look for increased funding if the county determines that that would be necessary to do different types of improvements within the emergency communications center. I did ask the department whether or not they're looking at this, and they said they have. I don't have details on what that may look like. And the final piece I wanted to bring to your attention was the facility equipment and facility planning and capital needs. These are long-term planning needs for the CAD. A lot of things can happen, including budget deficits, recessions, savings plans, limited capacity, expert capacity within the department to juggle multiple very complex and sensitive IT replacements at the same time. And TEBS is very instrumental. I'm not sure if Mike Knuppel is here or not, but he's instrumental in ensuring that the planning takes place the way it needs to. Things have been delayed on several occasions. Things have gone past their end of service life. As I said, in one case, the radio system was not even supported by the vendor. And there's also an increased push to have community input into a lot of these public safety planning processes. And the county meets those minimums required by, the planning board, that type of thing. But it may be an opportunity to understand if they can get increased community input, and what would that look like, and how does that change the timeline? So there's both the IT needs, the CAD, the public safety radio system, the radios, the mobile data computers. all of that, understanding that the replacements within the physical facility necessitate shifting staff often to the backup site, and make things a little more complicated, and they have to be done very slowly and deliberately to make sure that they can minimize any potential opportunities for mistakes. So I've got some discussion questions listed on pages 8 and 9 of your packet. I'm hoping that it kind of fleshes out the need to identify needs of IT staffing, facility, also identify potential funding to support these, and timing necessary to make sure these things happen in a timely fashion and not let any gaps in service, and also identify ways to be flexible and adapt. Again, technology is changing, people's needs are changing, and to the extent we can, to make sure that we're ready to anticipate and service those needs. So I do have discussion questions listed if you wanted to ask the department a little bit about their initiatives as far as recruiting and retention, where they're having some good successes, and overall planning needs for the next few years.
First off, again, thank you for your packet, and we do want to go through the discussion questions. But I also wanted to say to Ms. Onley, to you and your staff, I know it is a brutal job. You get 2,300 calls on an average a day, or whatever those numbers are. You have people that are in the middle of perhaps the greatest crisis that they've ever been in, calling you. And we do hear about the times that it didn't work, but there's so many thousands of times that it did. And to your point, Susan, that you know, there was a time that everybody had to run home to use the telephone. Those days are long gone. And so you get so many calls for the same issue, which is a good thing, but in the same breath, it's not. You know, I mean, so it truly is a great issue. But for the discussion questions, the released staffing study for the DC Metropolitan Police Department indicated the police calls for service decreased by 18%, driven in part by the enhanced use of their telephone rating unit. In an effort to reduce call volume to the ECC, has the department explored, I know they have, enhancing its telephone reporting unit and the potentially developing companion online reporting system? Chief.
So currently our telephone reporting unit, we receive calls through ECC. The calls come into ECC. They triage them and determine if they meet the qualifications to go to telephone reporting. That's an important aspect for us because we want the calls that need to go to an officer to go to an officer, and the calls that should be telephone reporting stay there. So regarding that, we have increased the number of calls that are true qualified that actually go to our telephone reporting unit, but they're still funneled through the Emergency Communications Center. So we would have to set up a separate call center for that. We don't think that's the right way to go right now. We'd rather focus on more hiring and getting up to our authorized staffing through other efforts, so we can triage the calls that way. Now, there are other efforts that we do want to look at. We spoke already about a public campaign about routing people to the right phone numbers, 988-311. Those are two of them that we'd really like to enhance the use of, rather than calling 911 and then 279-8000. We do get a decent amount of calls that should have been handled by 311. And, you know, the reality is the number that anyone can call that's always open is 911. And so they call it, and we do our best to triage it. And we have to get away from that. We have to have our citizens recognize that, because there is something, and I believe it's been mentioned in a number of places so far. We could get 20 calls, 30 calls, 100 calls in one moment. I rolled up on a traffic accident last week, and there were 4 people there at the traffic accident, and it wasn't a personal injury or critical thing. There were 4 people trying to call 911 at the same time. Mm-hmm. And that's what we have going on out in the field. And we could probably hire 100, well, it would take a lot to hire so that we had 100
If we
people.
could
Yeah.
hire.
100 people at one time, we're not going to overcome that. We have to look at other opportunities. The other thing that we are looking at are online reporting. We have an issue there because, again, technology for law enforcement hasn't caught up to where it needs to yet. So our online reporting right now, the status of that, if we had right now the only products available to us would allow you to enter some information in online, and then we'd have to create a staff to then write that into a report on the other end of it, because it's not working yet. It doesn't work the way we need it to yet. So we are looking at that, and we have a desire that the new RMS system offers us opportunities there, and we think we'll get somewhere with that too. But again, it goes back to people want to talk to humans, and they call 911 and 279-8000. But the biggest problem there that we're working through is everyone calls 911. At least 60% of the calls that come into 911 shouldn't go to 911. They should have gone to our non-emergency number, and then some of them should have gone to 988 or gone to 311. So we're really going to focus on that in the coming months in creating a difference there in the minds of our citizens of what's really appropriate to call 911 for. Because at the end of the day, and depending on the numbers you look at, and thank you to Ms. Farag for, again, another outstanding report analysis, the depth of history. I learned a few things, so thank you. When you have, let's say we were ideally staffed and had 10 to 14 people, right? Again, still, the calls need to be answered, and if we're getting a call about a dog barking on 911, we have to take that call and get it routed, and that takes away from getting the call from someone who has someone in front of them that just collapsed and needs CPR. So that is really where we're going to focus some things. There's some other technology areas too that we'll probably touch on, and I'm probably rambling at this point because it is such an expansive, the efforts that we have right now are so expansive, and I'll be happy to talk about them more, but I'll stop my rambling for a second.
Well, and I appreciate it. I know that, for instance, Animal Services is not, it does not answer their calls 24 hours. I can see Ms. Onley agreeing immediately here. Does not answer the calls, so people call 911 or 279-8000 or whatever. And that becomes an issue. We need, and part of that is us. I mean, we need to fund that somehow that they do answer calls 24. But we have to know it. We have to be reminded of what we need and how we can correct what we need. And we've had good conversations over time. The fact that we've lowered the number of employees or from last budget, if we first of all, we couldn't find people to fill those positions to start with. So, but I think what we need to do is start from zero-based budgeting and say how many do we need, what is the time frames we need them, and figure out how we're going to pay for them. But we need to know the final number, and that becomes a very important part. I mean, what we go through budgets once a year, but we go through budgets every day. We need to figure this out. And so that to me is important. When for the answer time that you had on the listing, does that answer time, that's the time that somebody says hello to the person calling, I'm assuming. That is not the time that you're switching over to somebody else. Is that, do we have numbers for that somebody who's actually going to listen to the call, dispatch the call to talk to the person? Do we have that?
Do you mean for going into the various queues?
Yes.
So I believe Director Onley can give you times for our 279-8000, but once the 911 call hits and someone answers it and it's 911 qualified, then the dispatcher will handle it, right? We put the non-emergency calls into a queue, and honestly, we have people waiting 5, 10, 20 minutes for that, right? And we want to find other options for that, like online reporting. But so the call comes in, and again, the average right now is 11 seconds to hearing a human voice, not
Okay.
just the system picking up. And then it gets routed through there. Director Onley, do you have anything you want to add to that? Okay, look at that. She taught me things. The problem that we're seeing, and we've handled a number of the complaints that the constituents have sent in to either council or to us directly, is those times where you have to wait, and they're outliers, they truly are outliers, but they're incredibly frustrating to citizens, is when we get to the 40-second mark of not speaking to a real voice. Generally, in the complaints we've seen in those times where our system is overwhelmed with calls, people get to the 40-second, 50-second mark and they hang up the phone. Now, I want to be clear, we have another problem on the other end. And this is something psychologically we're delving into, the director and I, about revamping our 911 message. Because I will tell you, when you don't get an immediate pickup by a person, there's a recording that tells you exactly what to do. In fact, I got a complaint forwarded to me at the end of last week where the person did exactly the opposite of what the recording says. Now, what that tells me is that we're failing on our communication effort in that announcement. So we actually talked over the weekend about oomping up the 911 so that people hear it, because one of the things that you have to take into account, and Councilmember Katz brought it up, people are in situations that are frantic, that are traumatic to them, and they're looking to talk to a person and they get a recording. It really doesn't matter what the recording says unless you grab their attention. Because the first thing that goes off on the recording is, do not hang up. Unfortunately, it's not getting through because we have people hanging up, and the way the system works is just like if you're calling AT&T to get service. Your call will be answered in the order it was received. And when you hang up, you go to the back of the order. And if we have 30 people calling, you're now at the back of the order. So we're going to change our 911 recording to, in a sense, super emphasize, don't hang up. It's also explained in there what the tones are. And the tones are for our deaf community, are very important because we need to provide services to them. Well, there's also a recording immediately after the English recording is a Spanish recording, and then the tones. All of this is explained, but the message isn't getting through because we have people that hang up and hang up and hang up, or get frustrated at that 40-second to 50-second mark and hang up anyway, thinking that they're going to come back around. So again, going back to our campaign to get people to call the right number, we're also going to emphasize that, and we're going to change again the recording because it's clear that we can do a better job.
Well, and it gets back to one of the questions on here is like the increased funding for the fee. First off, I always like to know how much are we getting now from the fee, and how much do we need, and if we get more, what are we going to do with it, and how fast can we do it? And I don't know those answers. I don't know whether or not we do know those answers, but go ahead.
So again, essentially, this is an extra tax, and
yes.
I know that the council and the county executive have always been concerned about it. And we have done our best through the years to manage our resources. And right now, we did bring up to the county executive that there is an opportunity to increase the 911 fees, and now is the right time. So I actually have a meeting this week. We've had several meetings already about getting to what is the right number for Montgomery County. Now, our 911 fees can pay for salaries, can pay for facilities, can pay for equipment. Now, to be clear, we do already get help from the state, paying
Yes.
for computer equipment, for consoles and such. So we do get a lot of things reimbursed there, but there's many more things like salary, like bonuses, like other facility needs that need covered. So we have proposed, we've made the proposal that we raise our 911 fees, and again, as already discussed, that's a fee on every single line. So for me, for any citizen, depending on how many lines, every line will get that. Unfortunately, I think I'm paying for like 7 people right now. So, but it's so critical. Of all the calls you want to have answered, or to make, the 911 is the most critical. So to me, it's worth it. We are going to look at what the number should be. The highest right now is Frederick County, and they're up at their total fee, to be clear, is $275, because it's $225 is the county fee plus 50 cents to the state, and that 50 cents goes and pays for the things that I talked about us getting reimbursed for. When you talk about long-range planning and funding, whether it be a facility, whether it be a new CAD, this funding can do that. So we will be coming back to you. So the timing question for you would be, we want this in effect for the new fiscal year, for fiscal year 26. So we'll be coming most likely in the spring to get approval to raise the fees. And again, I don't want to say what the number is going to be yet, because our OMB analysts are looking at that.
Yeah.
But it most likely, obviously, we're one of the lowest. We've purposely been one of the lowest, but now it's time to change. I could see anywhere from $1 to $2, and really, I'm going to let the analysts do that, because it is a serious thing when you put on a fee, a tax, and we want to make sure that we're at the right place.
And I appreciate the way you said it, but what do we pay right now? What is Susan Frog paying for her 5 lines per line right now?
You don't want to know. I think Chief
75
Frank said it's
What is it?
75 cents for the county portion, what, 50 or 75 for the state portion per line per month.
But it's 75 from the county portion.
Correct.
Which we can do. Okay. And anything else? If not, I'm going to turn to my committee members here. Since I went with her first, we'll go with you first this time. How about that for fairness? huh?
Awesome. Thank you. And thank you for suffering through my questions or comments during the last session, but more, I'm appreciative of your goal of trying to help educate the public better on how to use the system. We do want them to use the system when it's the system that should be used, but we also want them to know 911 does not fix all the things, right? And so we have other avenues for that, and we need to not overly stress it. And since there's a great video embedded in our packet that Ms. Farag put together, but Cassandra Tressler isn't here, I want to commend her and you, Assistant Chief Frank, for putting together all those informational videos that go out. She does a great job with the community outreach. So I greatly appreciate that. I have a question regarding whether the state funds are able to be used for things like the HVAC or for system redundancy, which are 2 big critical problems we have.
Yes. Now, the PSCC, we share that building, so as long as it's covering the 911 side of the house, yes, the state will fund that.
Okay, and so for the other half, that would have to be all county funding?
Correct.
Okay. And right now, is Frederick's $2.25 fee, is that the county's portion of the fee? Right.
Yes.
So they would still have their separate other fee, because that means our county fee is 1/3 of what Frederick County's is now.
Correct. And part of Frederick County's increase goes to an infrastructure change that they're making. And they have a independent 911 center. And that increase is helping to pay for that.
Right. Well, totally appreciate that they have an independent 911 center. And however we choose to do this in the future, and I want to make clear sort of the situation we find ourselves in now, whether it's on the capital infrastructure side or whether it's in the staffing side, are not new issues. These are things that have been building up over time and magnified over time, but give me a lot of heartburn in terms of risk management, right? And people are people. We can only go for so long in a day's time, and we can only expect so much. And Councilmember Katz pointed this out, that of course our 911 folks our call takers are hearing people at the absolute worst times possible. But one of the other things that I think is hard for people to understand about the work that they do is that They hear what comes in, they don't get closure on what happens. And that's a hard thing from a like a processing standpoint to really wrap your head around, because you have now passed it off and you don't know what happened, and you've got to go on right to the next stressful call, and that's a lot. But the state of the infrastructure piece is really significant to me from a risk management standpoint, in terms of being at an utmost critical level and need to be addressed. And this is not a nice to have, or it would be great if we could make it better. We are, as someone once said, being held together with duct tape and spit in that regard, right? And we can't live like that in the emergency management world. That is bad for everyone. It is bad for our residents. It is bad for our public safety professionals. And it makes doing the work day in and day out all that more challenging. So, I look forward to getting the report back from OMB about what needs to be done, but I think we need to be really literal about that and not mince words about it, because this has gone on for far too long, and we have to get this done. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Mink.
Thank you. On the same theme, how are we judging the success of either, formally or informally, qualitatively or quantitatively, of the hiring bonus and the pension plan? Like, how do we know if we're doing enough? Obviously, we want to see our retention rates improving with the pension plan. We want to see our recruitment rates tracking upwards as word spreads about the hiring bonus and about the pension plan. Are we seeing those things? What do we need to know about where we're at with that?
So far, the response both on the $5,000 bonus and the pension program is very good. It's making a difference. I just got to speak with our latest group of new trainees, and again, the information we're getting from them is the $5,000 made a difference. And also, when you look at hiring all around for all of public safety, as far as police and our 911, it's needed because it gets us a seat at the table. Like all the other agencies are offering the same thing, and if we don't offer it, it's a problem. Because they will look at the other agencies. So that is a benefit. I will say that, and going back to the attrition, I know the numbers didn't sound that way, but I get all of the notices when someone leaves ECC. I get either the resignation or they got a job somewhere else in the county. I will say that as soon as we enacted the pension program, those numbers significantly went down. I was not getting those notices, so that was an anecdotal thing to me that we're on the right track. And then also, as you've mentioned, the attrition during training has been great. Fantastic training team with our their academy, if you would, and they're taking on more than ever because they're also doing the call taking for fire rescue, and then also our call takers are learning to be fire dispatchers. And I've got to commend our fire rescue partners for the effort they're putting in to help educate our people and get us trained up so that we can continue to move down that path towards consolidation. It's a very hard job that fire rescue does, and I will tell you, as a police officer, I get on a scene when fire rescue there, and I see them, the command staff busy and directing, and it's a thing that I don't know, but we're very thankful that they're helping to educate us on those efforts so we can support them. So it's working. I will say, I'll be honest with anything, and I've talked about the jobs. I've talked about this for hiring for law enforcement. Since COVID, we have folks that like to telework or things like that. Unfortunately, ECC is not a telework site. You can't do that there. You got to be there. Heavy computers, heavy systems that you need access to. So we need to continue to look at wages for these folks. Granted, the pension is a good thing, but right now they're paid around the same area as what a target starting employee might be paid. So,
Yeah, that's, I mean.
we've
that's-
talked
there's no
with,
way.
we have talked with the county executive, and he's concerned about it as well. And so I'll continue to this critical job. And I told our new recruits this the other week. We talk about police officers being first responders, okay? It's these folks here that are the first responders. They're taking that call and making sure in an instant it goes to where it needs to and gets the right attention and gets the right information to our first responders, gets the right information to the people that are on the other end of the call, giving directions on CPR. We have a fantastic story about her staff saving the life of a retired officer by giving his wife directions on how to do CPR. So amazing work that those first responders are doing. And whatever we can do to support them, I know that the county executive supports it. I know that you support it, and we'll keep advocating as you've suggested.
Thank you. I mean, that's a great point that you raise. I mean, this is absolutely another one of those positions where when things go right, and they mostly do, nobody's going to hear about it and nobody's going to pay attention. And then when one thing goes wrong, it's disastrous, and it can make the national news. So it's extremely high stakes, extremely high stress, and it's important for us to make sure that we're doing everything we can to have the right capacity there on the line. And I think that it was a significant statistic that somebody, Chief, maybe you gave, that 70% of the calls really would be better off being directed somewhere else. Was that right?
Yes, around 60% should go
Around
to
60%.
somewhere else.
I mean, that seems like a huge issue that we should think about strategy on, because when we think about staffing to be able to take on those 60% of calls versus staffing to not, I mean, first of all, if all those calls are being directed where they really should be going, we probably need more staffing. You know, we have a bigger staffing deficit in those other locations than we realize now. And there's a staffing deficit, you know, everywhere across county government, but including in these different public safety and crisis response areas. So one, we need to be staffing up those other places to be able to handle those calls. But also our folks, we should not be having to have routine, daily holdovers. I mean, the staffing needs would be much less here. So both of these are issues that I think it would be great to really spend some time on strategy and support whatever you all need to help get that done, and be talking with our I think that this is really a big part of the equation. In addition to saying, yes, we want to make sure that we're funding all of these positions and that we're providing the bonuses and, having the pension plan, those are all essential for us to do. We have to be competitive within the region, and we know that we have not been. But we also need to have the calls being directed to the right places so that we can staff then appropriately for that.
Now, I do want to say, when you talk about strategy, we are looking at technology as well. Director Onley is working on PSAP to ASAP, more acronyms for you, but basically when our calls for...
I see Ms. Farag writing.
When our alarms come in, like calls from an alarm company comes in, instead of our call takers having to deal with that, we want a computer program to deal with that, to go to dispatch items like that. We also receive other things. People don't realize calls for tows come in. Tow requests come in, and so we're looking at technology to do that. But there's also
those are coming into 911.
Yeah, well, 279 8000.
Okay,
so they have to be dealt. All the calls, no matter what, that come into the center, either number have to be dealt with.
Right.
So we're looking at a computer program to do that. Right now we're trying to get over the obstacle of doing stolen checks on those tags coming in, because unfortunately we do have an auto theft problem, and it's part of our protocol. We need to figure out before someone just tows a car away, is it actually stolen? Because then we have to gather evidence. We got to know where the car goes. So Director Onley is making sure that we're looking at all the technology options available to reduce that call volume. Again, 2,500 calls in a day, it's a lot of calls. If we can just chip away at calling the right place, going to 311, having a technology option to answer calls, it makes it a little bit better.
Thank you. As we look at low-hanging fruit in this regard, another category of calls that I remember hearing about when I visited the ECC was those callers who are calling to talk to somebody. Like, that's really the reality here. And so they're the repeat callers, and it can be hard to get off the phone with them. You may need to eventually dispatch someone to go check and make sure that everything's okay. And, significant amount of time being spent on relatively few people who are not actually experiencing an emergency. The better place for those folks might well be 988, or Everymind, who can sit and chat with them, and that's part of what they do. And here in Montgomery County, we are trying to kind of market that a little bit differently than the way it's been marketed statewide, which is as a suicide response line and mental health crisis. We want this to be able to be a talk line, and we want to then staff it appropriately to do that. But it makes the marketing tricky because it's not the same as the statewide marketing, which is funded by the state and so on, which says call this if you are experiencing thoughts of suicide, et cetera. We also would like people who are calling 911 operators to chat to call 988 instead. Part of how we can do that is with transferring callers who call 911, transferring them over to 988. And I know that was something that was not happening before. I mean, we didn't have 988 before, obviously, so this is a new protocol that would need to come into practice. Is that something that's happening now?
Yes, it's happening. We transfer the calls to Everymind or 988 and/or the crisis center.
That's great. And then what else can we do from a marketing perspective at the county level? I mean, I was looking at our graphic, the Help is Within Reach graphic, which I know is it's so good. It's being used as a model by other places. And when I've looked at that before, I saw, listening support under 988. Yeah, that's perfect. But then I just noticed that it's health crisis listening support. And I wonder if it would make sense to tweak the wording there to make it clear that it's not just for crises, it's also just for listening support in general. Is that something that would make sense to update?
So we also work with HHS, and recently there was a meeting, the integrated call centers, where we discussed that and came up with the infographic, and that it could be something we could take back to them.
Great.
For revision.
And then the non-emergency line for the alternative to 911 as a non-emergency line, is that something that we should be spelling out on the same graphic? We're getting to a lot of phone numbers, I realize, but
it depends, because that's where I know there's legislation talking about a statewide 311 system. So that's where we paused on that, just in case the 311 statewide system comes into play.
Got it. The other low-hanging fruit, maybe this one is not that low-hanging because it comes with a budget tag, and we've talked about it and it hasn't happened, but I do think, as has been brought up, that the animal services not being there 24/7. I mean, it's an issue for our call takers. It's an issue for the public understanding who they should call when, and then it's also an issue for the officers and the folks making those calls. For the issues on the ground, we would all rather have an animal services person going to address the animal services issue. And I think often, an officer on the ground who has to prioritize the calls that are coming in, that's not necessarily going to be the first priority. And now you've got the public saying, well, why don't we have an officer here? Well, they're dealing with a life or death situation, down the road. And so I do think that as we discuss that as a budget line, that we need to make sure that it's very much understood amongst the full council, and that it's talked about on the executive side as well, that when we talk about animal services and funding those positions, we are talking about a very direct impact on our 911 responders and on our officers and capacity on the ground. We need to be looking at ways where we can chip away chunks of that 60%, and that's a chunk of that 60%. And funding that obviously would also allow us to provide better services for those calls. And then the last one that I'll touch on again is that fax tone, because that's something that I've gotten. I'm one of the people who's gotten calls about that, and people are really confused. And and as everyone has acknowledged, then they're hanging up and they're calling me in some of these cases and saying, 911 is broken, and then they're in a panic, and I'm like, it's actually not broken, just hang on. And so if there was something in the notification that's in the message that said, there's a sound coming up, stick with us, that specifically, because they would hear, they said, I actually was told by one constituent, like, it said don't hang up. but it's broken. So, I got to hang up and find somebody else to call.
Yeah, we're going to, unfortunately, Director Onley got the call from me. Like, we want to do something to, again, I can't describe it any more than oomph it up. I will tell you, as a police officer, getting on the scene of a critical incident, sometimes I need to raise my voice and assert myself in a certain way so that I get people's attention. Because again, they're in a traumatic episode, there's a lot of stress, they got all kinds of chemicals dumping in their body, and they're not listening to the words that are being said, like, you've reached 911, please hold. So we are going to look at that. It's a communication thing. I think within the week we'll have an updated one, and we're going to seek feedback on that as we go forward. And that is reference to tones. That will be on there. We're going to overemphasize all of it.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, I mean, I think if I'm calling 911 for an emergency, the last thing I want to hear is a soothing, elevator voice. Actually, I did have one more thing. Sorry, apologies, colleagues. When somebody calls, I mean, our call takers now are so used to receiving multiple calls about the same incident, as we discussed here. Many multiples potentially to calls about the same incident. And they have to be able to move through those quickly for the sake of expedience and everybody's safety on the ground and to get to the result that we need. But what happens when you have someone who, God forbid, is committing multiple crimes, is maybe attacking multiple people? And so callers maybe, and we had a situation like this where there was some confusion around that in my district as well. Callers may be calling in and saying, I've got, this incident, there was a stabbing happening here. And then another person says there's a stabbing happening here. And maybe it's even in the same building, or on the same block, but there could be different victims there. How do call takers, what do they do to suss out whether that is a call about the same incident, or whether we might have a mass, whether we might have multiple victims and somebody multiple victims who need to be responded to?
Right, and that's where we need to triage each cause if it's the same new call, rather. It's not necessarily associated to one or the other. Whether it be a collision, whether it be a stabbing, shooting, you have to treat it as if it's that first call that we've ever received, because you don't know who has what and who is a victim of something.
Got it, thank you.
Additionally to that, so part of our other functions that we're working to enhance our our Violent Crime Information Center, which may have a name change, I'm told, in the future. But one of the things that we have attached to that, as well as our Drones as First Responder program, which is now all across the county, is the opportunity to use Live 911. And that gives us a unique opportunity where our folks that are manning either the drones or our real-time crime center, they can plug into a 911 call. So in the example that we're building this capacity, and this is where we want to get to. But when we get that call, we have other law enforcement professionals that can now plug into that call. And not only while they're collecting data, while our call takers are collecting data, they can listen to it, but they can also continue to listen as you hear an incident unfold, and they can use their law enforcement experience to assess what's going on and identify that, okay, this is knock on wood, a stabbing spree like we had down in Wheaton, right? And can relay that information instantaneously, because they have a radio with them, to officers on the road. So we're building that capacity. I know that Ms. Farag mentioned that there, and that's where that becomes an opportunity in our service for critical incidents.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I just remembered one other category of calls that I remember. Sorry, Director. That I remember you telling me about. I think it was you. That we have parents who call in, especially at the start of the school year, and say, my kid doesn't want to go to school, and they're calling 911 for this. And so that's another category of call where I'm like, okay, well, what can we do to help folks to not call 911 for that purpose? And I wonder if MCPS could be putting out messaging maybe at the start of the school year to just notify parents, if you're having difficulty with your kids in this or that measure, here are the resources that are appropriate to call, and here are resources that are not appropriate to call. And I wonder if that could help alleviate the load.
Yes, we're going to speak with, in fact, I'm going to see Assistant Chief McBain after this, and I'll make sure that we double up that request. And now that we have Chief Jones, Marcus Jones.
Yes.
Citizen Jones.
We call him Mr. Jones.
Mr. Jones.
Yeah.
Now that we have Mr. Jones with
Yeah.
MCPS, we'll make sure that that message gets through.
Great, absolutely. And if there's anything that we can do on the council side to convey to MCPS or the board, just let us know. Thank you.
We're going to wrap up here in a second, but the council approved funding for the external staffing study. What is the status of that?
So the staffing study we're putting into play for our ISB and Field Services Bureau, and we appreciate the amount, but these staffing studies cost a great amount of money, as I've testified before. So it's going to handle those opportunities. I think I saw in the packet where it mentioned applying it to ECC. We're not quite at the right place for a staffing study at ECC quite yet, and we may not even need to deal with it, put funding towards doing a staffing study. I will say what happens there, our fire rescue partners have a unique thing. They have national standards that says, for this equipment, you need this many people in this radius, you need this. And there are some of that with the national models that we have that says how many people you need. The first thing we need to do is put in these technology opportunities that we're looking at. We need to see about getting people to call other numbers, and then see what our call volume looks like there. And then it's less difficult to determine how many people you need to address those calls. Certainly we need more people, but I think with professionals like Director Onley, she can point us in the right direction and get us there. And I do want to reiterate one thing. We've talked about and I've told Director Onley before, we still have those 25 positions. And because the county executive, Dr. Stoddard, as he testified, we still have those positions, and we're going to do everything we can to get to hire them so that we will fund them again. And get to that number where we want to be, which was recommended, and do away with consolidated dispatch. And then once we get there, then we're really going to look at, and we're going to come back, we're going to keep asking for more people to get to the right spot so that we keep that number, that 911 answer number. We'd love to get back to the 4 seconds we were. It might not be quite possible because when we were at 4 seconds, we were running back to our house to use the copper line to call in, but we're striving to get back there.
All right, so as a time frame, when will we know when we need the study?
I would expect, the way things are going right now, we're going to look at some point in fiscal year 26. And we can certainly talk more with Ms. Farag and talk more with you and get another update from Director Onley. But I do want to say that, and I sent an update on the workload analysis that 160,000 authorized was for, about where we are at that. The good news is we're in a very good place because we found the county has a contract and with a company that just did a workload analysis down in DC. So we're engaged. In fact, part of my work this week is to finish off the scope of work on that item.
Ms. Frog, did you want to comment on that, please?
I did. When I recommended the staffing study, I had envisioned that it would be the entire department because you are facing an enhanced pension multiplier for sworn staff in January/February that could lead to a bigger exodus of sworn officers. And I thought a staffing plan of the entire department would permit the police department to understand give it a menu of options of how to redeploy staff if you have an immediate mass exodus of sworn staff. I did think the ECC was important. The 160 is on me. If that is too low, that is 100% on me based on my research. It would be helpful if the police department could come back, also possibly with an estimate of the entire department. If it's not including the ECC, if it could come up with a detailed plan of how it's going to approach dealing with these different moving pieces. The Public Safety Committee is going to have a staffing update for the police department in early December, and I can't remember the date. But part of what I was going to ask there is if we're not going to have this staffing study in time for potential loss of employees in February, what are your contingency plans to redeploy people out on patrol to meet the needs? And it would be interesting to understand, too, if that's going to have, if a bigger shortage is going to have of sworn officers is going to have any kind of impact on ECC call takers and dispatchers, too, because you're going to have longer response times, that type of thing. What kind of flack will they be taking at the ECC, and is there some sort of need to plan for that piece too? So I will get in contact with the department. It would be helpful to understand what the whole department would cost in terms of a staffing study, and also what their contingency plans are that you can discuss in December, later in December.
And be forewarned, that's going to be a major part of your discussion in December.
So a couple things. I do have an estimate on, because I know what DC ultimately should have paid. I also, so we can give that number. But I'm also very confident in the planning that we have already. We have answers to the things that Ms. Farag just mentioned. We're happy to share them and put them into a consolidated effort, and we're happy to discuss them in advance. We have been preparing. We do have contingency plans. A lot of our effort has been guided towards hoping that, and hope's not a great thing. I don't like using that word.
Hope is a good thing, but not in this case.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
But we're planning for those contingencies. We have a menu of what we're going to look at doing. But what we want to do is focus on hiring and getting people into our academies and retaining employees so that we don't get to that crisis in the spring.
And I appreciate that. And I know both of my committee members want to have other questions, but Chief Smedley, did you want to comment about the mobile integrated health program that we do that helps people for the 911, rather the frequent flyers that we get?
I can briefly speak on it. So quite often we have high users is what we call them now. We've
your term is much nicer than mine. Yes.
And what we realize is kind of similar to the ECC discussion, where it's not always the appropriate place to call 911 to fix your problem. It's not always the appropriate place for us to respond in a heavy apparatus or transport unit to take care of your situation. There are other ways that we can do that. And the integrated health is one of those areas where we can identify those high users that it is a question sometimes between a doctor's appointment and they sometimes the perception is if I go on an emergency response vehicle, I'll get seen into the facility much quicker, and that is not. Just like the triaging calls and everything we do, we triage calls in the hospital setting as well. So that mechanism is to divert the impact on our response to maintain the emergency need that exists. And if there's not an emergency need, or we're not the primary agency or only agency that handles that, let's look at other alternatives to do that without spending $500,000 to $600,000 for a transport unit times 2 people times 3 shifts. So that's kind of the model. I'm just giving a kind of a primary, but since you've asked me this question, I want to really highlight what's been said, but in a different way. ECC is a primary mission.
Absolutely.
It's a primary mission. Fire and rescue, law enforcement cannot do their mission if ECC is not elevated to being a primary mission. If it's not elevated to having the infrastructure, the support, the wages and benefit packages that law enforcement and fire rescue service have, we're going to constantly have challenges. And in the packet, you see 43 people from fire and rescue are staffing the ECC with the same level of benefit packages and contracts that our frontline personnel in fire rescue are receiving. So when you talk about why we're coming over the budget, that budget is impacted based on the contract that those 43 people are working, at least on the fire and rescue side. And why is that important? Well, you look at the ECC speaks multiple languages. I'm not talking about, they speak law enforcement language. They speak fire language. They speak emergency medical services language. Then they have to speak 311 language, et cetera, et cetera. So it's important to understand those things, and it's not easy to translate going from a law enforcement to fire and rescue and vice versa. So it's very complex and complicated. The good news is there's training, and that's why the training may take so long, so that they can provide those people that can translate. But it's a different discipline and different things that you have to contend with. So again, I urge that we really make sure that the ECC is a primary mission and all the necessary support to make those things happen. Just like law enforcement and fire, we ask the question all the time to us. How many calls do you respond to? We respond to every last call.
Yep.
But if we don't get the call, or the call is not dispatched appropriately, we're impacting our system. So I must leave with that. Make sure that we're supporting the ECC as a primary mission, or we'll be in the news like other people around the country. The good news is we're not.
Well, and to your point, I'm going to turn to my committee members here, but to your point, we want to be a part of the solution here. We need to hear what we need to do so that we can come up with a better solution. We're better than most in our area, but the person that's facing that terrible crisis, they don't care that we're better than most. They care about the crisis they're facing. Councilmember Luke.
Thank you. And my question really sort of dovetails with what Councilmember Katz was just talking about. There was an article in the Baltimore Banner on Friday, and I don't know if any of you saw it, but it was about folks who were chronically using 911 for inappropriate reasons, right? They clearly had mental health challenges, but they'd been told, they'd been given assistance, and they just sort of wouldn't follow through with whatever was offered. And I know Every Mind is not here. Every Mind is our 988 receiving entity designated for the county. And you know, it is beyond just if you are feeling suicidal. That is, 988 is to be used for broader things. However, we do have a significant challenge, not just us, other counties. And the news article was about Baltimore County. I want to make that clear. It was not about a Montgomery County situation. But, you know, this is a primary interest for me, which is how are we doing a better job of getting those folks to care or compliance? And at a certain point, if they're not willing to engage in any way, what other choices are left? Right? Because if they are significantly utilizing resources or utilizing resources you're not supposed to, and I know there is a charge for misuse of 911, I don't know that we've ever had people charged with that here in Montgomery County, and that's obviously not the desired outcome, right? And I know we don't have the assisted outpatient treatment program up and running yet, but that is a tool per se to in the future perhaps get folks who've been unwilling with other more voluntary means to get treatment in order to get that treatment. So we're not doing those things, right? Can you speak to sort of how significant a burden the high users are, and whether or not we as a jurisdiction have had to ever in the past 5 years, let's say, utilize the misuse of 911 statute?
Yes, we have. And that misuse of 911. And I wouldn't say necessarily it was a high user that was suffering from a mental illness. It was just somebody that was calling. I think there were 2 cases within the past 5 years for Montgomery County.
Okay, and yes, I should say there are other reasons why that may be applied. But you know, for me, I'm trying to look at particularly the population with acute behavioral health needs or Alzheimer's, dementia, et cetera, that may impair their decision making when they're making that call in the first place, and not necessarily be as amenable to what they are advised on scene once a first responder arrives because of those impairments. So thank you.
I'm
Go ahead. No.
I was going to say just to one additional piece on that. We're expanding our capability with our crisis intervention team, our behavioral assessment unit, and real chronic cases would be sent to that unit to look at and do a soft touch to talk about with that person. Number one, the impacts they're having on our system, but number two, here's where you can get some help. So we really do like the work that unit is doing, the police officers involved there, because they are able to influence and redirect on occasion.
And yes, and I appreciate the work that they're doing. And I do think that we have an opportunity, the forms that were attached at the back end of that SIM report that the state just did for Montgomery County were templates to use that could be adapted for Montgomery County to use, so that you're getting consent from the individuals to help, again, get them over to where they need to be for that help, because you're not able as a law enforcement to send, health information or to transmit that. This would allow that on scene. It is used by other jurisdictions in the state. And so that could be a valuable tool for our CIT team to use, again, for those folks to help have better connection to services in a more immediate fashion.
Thank you. Councilmember Mink.
Thanks. Circling back to the staffing study conversation, we have a new director of behavioral health and crisis services also, and I know that Director Martin is looking at how we can make improvements and where we should make changes in the rest of our crisis response space, and looking at that certainly is going to have staffing impacts as well. And I know that she was looking at contracting with another expert to come in and tell us. Give us more ideas about how we can make some of those changes as well. But as we think about what's kind of our ideal layout for who should be responding to what types of calls, and what the staffing implications are for that, I think that's a really relevant variable here as well, to kind of figure out what that timeline looks like for where we'll get clear recommendations for what that space could and should look like in Montgomery County. And obviously, so anyway, I'm just noting that I think that's a really relevant piece. And so if we did the staffing study, I don't know how much sense it would make to do the staffing study without ECC, because we would want to make sure that that's included in the look that's being made at the wider crisis response space, or if we should be waiting on the entire staffing study so that we can include those additional potential other nonprofit partners, or I'm not sure what would make sense, but just noting that I think that that's a variable that we have to make sure that we're looking at.
Okay. Go ahead.
Council Member Katz, if you would indulge me for once, I think you were getting ready to wrap up. If you would,
yes, but go ahead.
If you would indulge me,
consider yourself indulged. Go ahead.
I do want to recognize, because I don't think you're going to get the chance to see Director Onley again.
Oh.
Director Onley is retiring after decades of service to
we
this
don't
county.
want to hear this. I'm sorry that you're speaking. Yeah, go ahead.
So it really is, when you talk about a significant, profound loss for us. What she knows, she has forgotten more about emergency communications than any of us in here will know. And I just wanted to make sure I brought that to your attention, that we're going to lose another exceptional employee, but she's going to start her next chapter in her life, and we're excited for her. But I wanted to recognize her in front of you.
Well, thank you, and thank you. You deserve a round of applause. Though the audience has diminished from the beginning here, but thank you for all that you have done, and I know where Montgomery County is in need. So if you can continue to be the greatest of assistance that you have been, we would sincerely appreciate it. But Good luck in your future. When does this happen?
December 1st.
Oh,
Yes.
oh my. Well,
Thankfully,
thank you.
she gave
we're
us
ending on a sad note.
I talked her into a little bit of a runway for us. Thankfully, she's going to help us hire the next director, which
Good.
has huge shoes to fill.
Yeah, for sure. Wow.
Thank you very much. We're adjourned.
Wow, that's big news. Wow. Well, congratulations. I mean, that's we will miss you.